I'll never forget the sight of that bird that night. It was a Canada goose, and its tiny little eyes were squinting, and its long neck was straining, and it was trying for all its might to like move along the water. And I could almost see its little feet pedaling furiously beneath the water in this filthy canal in Manchester. But it was going absolutely nowhere. It was not moving anywhere. And I've never felt so much empathy and solidarity with a creature. Because it embodied exactly how I felt at that time. It felt like however much energy I was putting into everything, I just wasn't getting anywhere, and all of the forces were just pushing me back. The work that needed doing felt endless. The enormity of the task was overwhelming. Activism felt like a thankless task in a world that had just decided not to care. And when I got home that night, I just crashed, like big time. And I lay in bed for a week with the curtains closed. I couldn't bear to face the world. I didn't go out, I didn't speak to anybody. And eventually a friend kind of dragged me out and took me to the countryside, to his family home, and just looked after me for a few weeks. And I recovered from this massive burnout. And after a few weeks, I developed enough clarity to see what I needed to do, which was to completely overhaul my life and just to live more closely with nature. So I quit my desk-bound life in Birmingham, moved to West Wales and retrained in woodland management and field ecology and outdoor education. And that rugged Welsh landscape just held me, and like the small town that I moved to was like surrounded on all sides by these hills and valleys, and it just felt nestled, and it just gave this like sense of safety and security. And it felt like whenever my emotions were just too big for me to handle, I could just go outside and the landscape could just hold it for me. And where I ended and the land began got more and more blurred. It just felt like I was becoming land. And that process of regeneration through connecting with nature has brought me back to life a number of times. And it's now my main source of sustenance, of nourishment, of inspiration, that keeps me engaged, it keeps me out there in the world dealing with these massive, overwhelming issues. And I haven't crashed quite so spectacularly in quite a long time, I'm glad to say. And I see that process of regeneration working for other people as well. I work with activists, bringing nature connection to other activists to help sustain their activism. In the nature connection courses that I run, the people that come on the first day are not the people that leave on the last day. It's like watching people come to life. It's just watching lights light up inside people. It's quite magical. But what excites me most about this work is the power of that work that I've been convinced by through so many of those transformative moments of my own and seeing them in other people, like seeing the power of that work. What's most exciting about it is when we bring the power of that work into connection with social change, into the context of social change. As society, as it is, postmodern Western society, is so deeply disconnected with the natural world. It like in every single sphere of society, be the economy, our health system, our education system, nature is just not part of it. We're so disconnected. And most people live incredibly alienated lives. We often, particularly in cities, we sort of live these hectic 24-hour lifestyles with artificial lighting, artificial temperatures, working and consuming stimulants to just keep on producing and keep on being busy and keep on consuming. And that sort of ignoring of like ecological limits and ecological cycles and natural flows of energy, ebbs and flows of natural cycles, is part of how we have de-wilded the world and how we've de-wilded ourselves. We dismiss our emotions and our sensations as less important than our rational thoughts and our rational mind. And it's making us sick. and it's making the planet sick. And we're so socially conditioned in this productivist culture that even in the activist communities that exist in order to resist that culture tend to replicate those things themselves in the way that I've experienced myself. And research shows that disconnection from nature impacts us as individuals. It affects our physical and mental health. On a community level, it causes increased violence and crime and conflict in communities. And on a societal level, it leads us to plunder our resources in a way that's completely unsustainable and actually holds back social change. It's been identified as a barrier to social change, that disconnection from nature. And just like the foundations of Western society, that disconnect is founded, is closely tied to colonialism, and is therefore founded, just like Western society, on foundations of violence and slavery and oppression. As lands were invaded and colonised, indigenous connection cultures to the land were forcibly taken away so that people could be more easily exploited as a workforce. And the destruction of those connection cultures went hand in hand with the destruction of land, the plundering of resources, the extermination of any species that threatened us, the killing of any species that were useful to harvest and to kill. So our disconnection from nature is political. It is deeply political. Our relationships with nature, ourselves and each other are inescapably interconnected. And as long as white people dominate and oppress people of colour, and men dominate and oppress women, and people dominate and oppress nature, we will never eradicate domination and oppression from our society and from our lives. Equally then, our reconnection with nature is deeply political, and it's part of the decolonisation process. And ultimately, time spent just hanging out in nature, connecting with nature, as a non-productive, completely useless act is in itself a subversion of that productivist culture, and an inherently rebellious act. And as a nourishing restorative practice that can support activism to create a better world, as Audre Lorde says, it is also an act of political warfare. But on its own, it's not enough. Just to go out and connect with nature and do nothing as a result is not enough. Connection that doesn't result in meaningful solidarity is not real connection, because it's still in the realms of alienation. When we really connect, we see through the false construct of the self, of the individual, and see our true identity as part of nature defending itself. And with that expanded sense of self, there lies an abundance of resilience and strength and energy and inspiration. An action that comes from that place of connection, can be sustained and can be regenerative. It doesn't lead to burnout. It loops back into the cycle of things. It sustains and galvanizes resistance. It inspires that regenerative action that can create the condition for the flourishing of society and of the ecosystems that we depend on, and recognises that the ecological and the social are not and can never be separate. And, thankfully, it can be really fun and joyful and exuberant, because part of the rewilding is a reconnection with nature and a re-enchantment with the natural world. And as we heal and regenerate ourselves, we heal and regenerate the earth. So Adrienne Maree Brown, who is a black activist and writer and amazing human, talks about pleasure activism. I suspect that to really transform our society, we will need to make justice one of the most pleasurable experiences we can have. The more connected we are, the more resilient we are. And the more resilient we are, the more powerful we become. And when that power is directed towards the collective good, it can be a truly liberative force. I'll leave you with the words of Edward Abbey. It's my favourite quote ever. He reminds us, do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. It's not enough to fight for the land. it is even more important to enjoy it while you can, while it's still here. So get out there and explore the forests and climb the mountains and bag the peaks and run the rivers. Breathe deep of that yet sweet and lucid air. Sit quietly for a while and contemplate the precious stillness, the lovely, mysterious and awesome space. And I promise you this much. I promise you this one sweet victory over our enemies. You will outlive the bastards.